Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to go back to the 90s,
Oh,
to a trial that, really gripped the nation, right?
yeah.
The O.J. Simpson case.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone's got an opinion on whether he did it or not.
Oh, definitely.
But we're going deeper than those hot takes.
Hmm.
We're going to look at all the evidence and the legal strategy and all the media craziness surrounding it to give you a clear picture of exactly what went down.
I think what's really fascinating about this case is that it wasn't just a murder trial, it was a cultural phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It really kind of tapped into societal anxieties about race and celebrity and even the justice system itself.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Um,
So let's set the scene right. June 12th, 1994.
okay.
Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman are found brutally murdered
Yeah,
outside Nicole's condo in Brentwood, Los Angeles.
right.
And the media just descends like a storm.
Oh, yeah,
Almost immediately, all eyes turn to OJ,
of course.
right? NFL star,
Oh, yeah.
actor,
Mhm.
and Nicole's ex-husband.
Yeah, and, the prosecution seemed to have a strong case against him right off the bat.
Okay.
They found blood evidence at the crime scene, in his car, and even on a pair of gloves.
Oh, wow.
And they found one glove at the crime scene and then the other one at his estate.
Huh.
And, you have to remember that DNA analysis was still pretty new then.
Oh, right, yeah.
So this was cutting-edge stuff at the time.
Okay, so that DNA evidence, that's got to be hard to argue with, right?
Yeah.
Can you help me understand how strong the link to OJ really was?
Well, the prosecution brought in some expert witnesses to testify, and they said that the probability of the DNA that they found at the crime scene belonging to somebody else, not OJ, was 1 in 170 million.
Wow.
So to put that into perspective, imagine if you filled a football stadium 170 times over with people. Only one person in all of those stadiums would have that DNA profile,
Wow.
statistically speaking.
That's an incredibly powerful piece of evidence.
Yeah.
It seems like an open and shut case, but as we know,
Yeah,
it wasn't.
not at all.
So how did the defense, the so-called dream team, how did they fight back against this evidence?
Well, they had a really bold strategy, a multi-pronged approach, really.
Okay.
They attacked the evidence itself, they attacked the investigation, and ultimately they put the LAPD on trial.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so they brought up racial bias, which was a huge part of the social landscape then, especially with the LAPD's history.
Yeah, absolutely. They focused on this detective, Mark Furman,
Right.
who had been, a really key part of the investigation. And Furman had a history of using racial slurs.
Mm-hmm.
So the defense was arguing that this really kind of raised some big questions about the case,
Yeah.
and potential evidence tampering and a bias against OJ, because OJ's black.
So they were basically saying, can we trust the LAPD with their history of racial tension to handle this case fairly? Did they maybe frame OJ?
That was a huge part of their strategy.
Right.
And I think it resonated with a lot of people, especially in the black community, who had, seen a lot of this kind of systemic racism from the LAPD.
Yeah.
So, they were really questioning, what was going on.
And it wasn't just Furman and racial bias. They also attacked just how the evidence was handled.
Right, exactly. They pointed to inconsistencies in what's called the chain of custody,
Okay.
which is like the record of how evidence is collected, how it's handled, how it's stored.
Right.
And so they suggested that the evidence could have been contaminated or maybe mishandled, maybe even planted.
And then there's the gloves.
Yes.
One of the most iconic moments of the trial.
Oh, for sure.
It's still talked about today.
The if it doesn't fit moment.
Exactly.
So during the trial, they asked OJ to try on the gloves that they found at the crime scene and
Right.
at his home.
Right.
And to everybody's surprise, the gloves appeared to be too small.
Oh, wait.
They didn't fit.
Oh, so that must have been a turning point in the trial. It seems like that would cast doubt on a major piece of evidence.
Oh, yeah. And it was all happening right there in front of the jury.
Wow.
Johnny Cochran, who was the lead defense attorney,
Right.
was a master of the courtroom.
Yeah.
And he had this really famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." And it just turned those gloves into the symbol of the prosecution's incompetence.
Right.
Like they didn't know what they were doing. And it just, kind of fueled all these doubts about their case.
So even though the prosecution had DNA evidence linking OJ to the crime scene,
Mm.
and they were saying, this is like a 1 in 170 million chance,
Right.
the defense was able to shift the focus.
Yeah, they were able to create this reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of turned the whole narrative away from, what OJ allegedly did towards the LAPD, making him look like he was a victim of this, racially biased system.
It was a brilliant legal strategy.
Oh, totally.
Whether or not you agree with it. It definitely captivated the nation. But remember, this was like the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Media coverage was like nothing we'd seen before.
Girl, it was wall-to-wall coverage. The trial was on live TV.
Yeah.
It was like a media spectacle.
Yeah.
Everybody was just glued to their screens, watching every little thing that happened.
Right.
Analyzing every piece of evidence.
Every word.
Yeah, it was crazy.
The trial became like a national obsession.
It really did.
And it seems like those opinions were often very divided, along racial lines.
Absolutely. It was a really polarized situation, public opinion. I mean,
Right.
a lot of Black Americans who, were already distrustful of the LAPD.
Yeah.
They saw the trial as, about racial injustice. And then a lot of white Americans just felt like, the evidence against OJ was just overwhelming.
Right.
So the trial just became this touchstone, I guess you could say, for these really deep conversations about race and class and the entire American justice system.
So we've got a case with seemingly strong evidence, a really, well thought out, well executed defense strategy, and this media frenzy that just turned the whole thing into this national soap opera.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it really comes down to one question, right? Did OJ do it?
Right.
And to answer that, we need to look a little deeper into how the legal system works.
Yeah, exactly.
And what beyond a reasonable doubt really means.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll get into after the break.
Sounds good.
So we've got the scene, we've got the evidence, the defense's strategy, and this whole media frenzy.
Right.
So let's get into the legal process here.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that in a criminal trial, the burden of proof is completely on the prosecution.
Okay.
They have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Which is a very high bar to clear.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. So even if there's, a lot pointing to the defendant, if there's even a tiny bit of doubt, the jury has to acquit.
Exactly. And in the Simpson case, the defense, they did a really good job of introducing that doubt.
Okay.
By focusing on the racial bias and questioning how the evidence was handled.
Right.
They were able to create just enough uncertainty to lead to that acquittal.
Okay, so not guilty, case closed.
Well, not so fast.
Okay.
There's another part of this legal saga, the civil trial.
Right.
So remember, OJ was acquitted in the criminal trial, but he was later found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman in civil court.
So two trials, two different verdicts.
Right.
Can you break down the difference between criminal and civil court?
Sure.
Seems like people get them mixed up sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. So a criminal trial is about punishment, right?
Okay.
The state is representing the people, and they bring charges against a person for breaking the law.
Right.
And if they're found guilty, that person faces penalties like prison or fines.
Okay.
And the standard of proof, like we've been talking about, is beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right. And what about civil court?
Civil trials are more about resolving disputes between people or, entities. And it's not really about punishment. It's about figuring out who's responsible.
Right.
And, compensation for the harm that was caused.
Okay. So in this case, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against OJ to try to get some justice, even though he was acquitted in the criminal trial.
Exactly. And the standard of proof in a civil case is lower.
Oh, okay.
So instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury just has to decide if it's more likely than not that the defendant is responsible, and that's called a preponderance of the evidence.
Preponderance of the evidence.
Yeah.
So in the civil trial, the jury did find OJ responsible.
They did, and they ordered him to pay millions of dollars in damages to the families.
So two contrasting verdicts. On one hand, he's acquitted of murder.
Yeah.
But then he's held financially responsible for their deaths.
Yeah. It's a complicated legal situation.
It is. It shows how different the purposes of the legal system are.
Right.
And how those burdens of proof, play out.
Yeah.
So the criminal trial, that was focused on whether the state could prove that OJ committed the murders.
Right.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
But the civil trial was focused on whether he was liable for the deaths.
Right.
Based on that lower standard of proof.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the same events can be judged so differently just through these different legal processes. But as if the story couldn't get any more complicated,
Yeah.
we have the If I Did It book.
Oh, yeah, that definitely threw another wrench in the whole thing.
So in 2006, O.J. writes this book called If I Did It,
Right.
which was marketed as a hypothetical account of the murders.
Yeah.
Hypothetical.
But a lot of people saw that as a confession, right?
A lot of people did, yeah. I mean, the way it was written, the details he included,
Yeah.
it felt like he was admitting guilt, but hiding behind this, this idea that it was fiction.
And then the Goldman family ended up with the rights to the book?
They did. It was kind of an unusual situation.
Yeah.
But as part of the civil judgment against O.J., the Goldman family was given the rights
Oh, no.
to the book.
Huh.
And so they republished it
Okay.
with the title, If I Did It, The Goldman Family Answers.
Oh, wow.
And they added their own commentary and perspective.
That must have been a powerful statement from the family, taking back the narrative and using the book, which they saw as a confession, to try to hold O.J. accountable.
Yeah, for sure. It was a bold move.
Yeah.
It kept the case in the public eye and just reignited that debate
Right.
about his guilt or innocence.
So even years after the trials,
Mm-hmm.
the O.J. Simpson case, it was still making headlines,
Yeah,
still sparking debate, still bringing up all these strong emotions.
absolutely. And even today,
Yeah.
all these years later, it's still this captivating study
Yeah.
in criminal justice and race relations and the power of media.
Yeah. I mean, it makes us think about these uncomfortable questions, about bias and perception and what we can really know for sure.
It's a story that keeps going,
It does.
revealing new layers
Mm-hmm.
as time passes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's amazing how this case, even decades later, it still just sparks so much debate.
Oh, yeah,
It really was a defining moment, I think, for American culture.
definitely. I mean, the O.J. Simpson trial, it wasn't just about one man's guilt or innocence, right?
Right.
It became like this mirror
Yeah.
reflecting all of America's divisions and anxieties.
About race and class.
Yeah, and about the justice system.
Yeah, it's like the trial ripped the bandage off of all these societal wounds
Mm-hmm.
and exposed everything underneath.
Yeah, and it's still impacting us today,
Oh, yeah.
The issues that it raised, like racial bias in law enforcement, the role of the media,
Mm-hmm.
in shaping public opinion, the whole DNA evidence thing. We're still talking about all this stuff. Yeah. It feels like the O.J. Simpson trial was kind of like a turning point,
Yeah.
for how we view and how we talk about all these issues.
I think so. I think you're right. It forced us to have this national conversation about police brutality and racial profiling.
Right.
And these are issues that we're still dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And it really put a spotlight on those systemic issues
Yeah.
within law enforcement. And I think that fueled a lot of the movements
Right.
for criminal justice reform.
And just the way that the media covered it was insane.
Yeah.
It was like the birth of reality TV,
Yeah.
but with these real-life stakes.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, this 24/7 news cycle, constant analysis and speculation.
Yeah.
It became a form of entertainment. It
Right.
was like, what we see today.
Yeah, yeah. So we went deep on this case, the
Yeah.
evidence, the strategies, the media frenzy,
Mm-hmm.
the impact on society. I mean, what's the biggest takeaway? What's the lasting legacy of this whole thing?
For me, it's the ambiguity of it all. Even with all the evidence and all the legal arguments,
Yeah.
we still have these unanswered questions, and it challenges us to think critically
Right.
and question our assumptions
Yeah.
and to accept that sometimes there just isn't a clear answer.
It's a reminder that the truth can be really hard to find,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to these complex human events.
Yeah. And I think it also forces us to really look at our own biases.
Right.
How our perceptions are shaped.
By the media.
By the media, yeah, and by all these societal forces.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the most important lesson,
Yeah.
to approach these issues with humility.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize that we don't know everything
Right.
and be open to different points of view.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask you, the listener, a question.
Okay.
Knowing everything you know now, having gone through all the details of this case,
Yeah.
where do you stand?
Yeah.
Did O.J. do it?
It's the question, right?
Yeah.
It's the question that continues to fascinate and divide us.
Right.
And there's really no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the most important takeaway is just the process of seeking answers.
Yeah.
Like looking at the evidence, thinking about the arguments, grappling with all the complexity. That's where the real value is.
Engaging with these really difficult questions, challenging our own assumptions, deepening our understanding of the world.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the start, you know?
Right.
There's so much out there.
Yeah.
Documentaries, books, articles.
Oh, yeah. Tons of stuff.
All going into even more detail
Yeah.
about the O.J. Simpson trial and the impact that it had.
So keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
Keep those minds open.
Yeah, because, you know, some mysteries, like this one,
Yeah.
they might never be fully solved.
Yeah.
But the search for understanding, that's a journey worth taking.
Couldn't agree more.
So until next time, stay curious, everyone.
Stay curious.